A girl in her teens was babysitting for a family in Newport Beach. The family is wealthy and had a very large house. You know the sort, with a ridiculous amount of rooms. Anyway, the parents were going out for a late dinner and a movie, so the father told the babysitter that once the children were in bed, she should go into this specific room and watch TV there. He obviously didn't want her wandering around the house. The parents took off for their evening out, and soon she had the kids in bed and went to the room to watch TV. She tried watching for a while, but she was very disturbed by a clown statue in the corner of the room. She tried to ignore it for as long as possible, but it started freaking her out so much that she just couldn't handle it anymore. She resorted to calling the father and asked, "Hey, the kids are in bed, but is it okay if I switch rooms? This clown statue is really creeping me out." The father, in a very serious voice, told her, "Get the kids, go next door and call 911. She asked the father, "What's going on?" And he responded with, "Just go next door, and once you call the police, call me back." She got the kids, rushed out of the house to the next door neighbors, and called the police. When the police were on their way, she called the father back and asked, "So really, what's going on?" He responded, "We don't have a clown statue." He then further went on to explain that the children had been complaining about a clown watching them as they slept. He and his wife had just blown it off, assuming that they were having nightmares, but her call had made him realize something wasn't right if she was also seeing a clown. The police arrived and managed to apprehend the clown. The clown turned out to be a midget. A midget clown. He was some homeless person dressed as a clown who had somehow found a way to get into the house and had been living there for several weeks. He would come into the kids' rooms at night and watch them while they slept. Because the house was so large, he was able to avoid detection, surviving off their food for all that time. He had been in the TV room right before the babysitter had come in, and when she entered, he didn't have enough time to hide. He just froze in place and pretended to be a statue. When I was in high school, around 18, I babysat 2 boys every day after school, plus some weekend nights when the parents would go to concerts. Let's call the boys Drake, who was 11, and Josh, 13. This happened on a Saturday night when the parents went out for dinner. They would always leave money for pizza, so when the time came to pick it up, Drake wanted to join me while Josh stayed behind to play his video games. This was normal behavior for both of them. I left with Drake and locked the door behind us. We then got the pizza, which probably took no more than 15 minutes. When we got back to the house, I called to Josh and we all enjoyed our pizza while watching a movie. All normal stuff. This is where it gets weird. This happened in the fall, so it gets darker sooner. The boys were getting sleepy and it was super dark, so I told them it was time to get to bed. They were practically both asleep watching the movie anyway. They headed up with very little back talk. Normally it can be rough getting them to bed, especially Drake. In the house there is a second-story family room, so you can see the upstairs hallway and bedrooms from the family room and kitchen downstairs. I was in the kitchen when I saw Drake come to the end of the upstairs hallway, and instantly I could tell he didn't look like himself. He was pale and visibly shaken. He asked me if I could come upstairs for a second. I immediately felt uneasy because he also sounded horrified. I've never seen him act the way he was acting. He was definitely very scared, which was very unlike him. I, of course, went upstairs and asked him, "What's up?" While pointing to a closet, he asked, "Did you open that closet because Josh and I never open it?" This clearly really freaked him out, and of course I start panicking internally. I came up with a quick explanation to calm him down, saying something like it probably just didn't latch all the way and it popped open, but he insisted that had never happened before, so it wasn't possible. I will admit, I was having a hard time believing it myself, as I had spent almost every day in that house for the past year and knew it well. I tried my best to keep him calm and to brush it off, but inside I was panicking. Before I go on, I will say no, I absolutely did not think Drake was lying or messing with me. And no, I knew it wasn't Josh. It wasn't like him to ever pull pranks or anything like that. He was very quiet and sweet, always keeping to himself and being friendly, not confrontational. Nor did I leave the front door unlocked when we got pizza. I always locked their door instantly when I went in and out, as it was part of my routine and it wasn't my house, so of course I would be extra careful, and always double-checked that I'd locked their doors. Plus, Drake had even told me, as we were leaving to get pizza, that I didn't need to lock the door because the pizza place was close, but I insisted we lock it. The boys were in bed, and I was downstairs in panic mode. I called my then boyfriend at the time, telling him what had happened, and asked what he thought I should do. Should I call the police or not? I chose not to, and ended up keeping him on the line while I searched the house. My heart was pounding, especially while checking the basement. Everything seemed fine, but I was terrified. It didn't help that the house was on a corner lot bordering the woods, and they had windows with no curtains on the main floor. So I felt like there was either someone in the house with me, or someone who was outside the house watching us from the windows. For all I knew, there could have been some kind of paranormal shit going on. I turned all the lights off in the house and glued myself as flat as a pancake to the couch to hopefully not be seen, and anxiously waited for their parents to return. It was about an hour later that they came home. I told them what had happened, and the mom quickly tried to blame it on the cat. I loved the whole family, but I honestly believed there was no possible way it could have been their cat. I didn't see how it could have been possible with the kind of door handle they had, and the force required to open it. Of course I dropped it, agreed with their hypothesis, and drove my ass home. The next day, I received a frantic call from the boy's mom. It turned out an intruder had been in the house. He had hidden in the very closet that had caused Drake so much distress. During the night, they had heard a noise. On checking, they had caught the intruder rummaging through their belongings. He had snuck in the house before I had arrived, and had stayed hidden in the closet. Thinking we had all gone to get pizza, he had left the closet but soon realized Josh had stayed behind. Instead of getting back in the closet, he had hidden under the bed in the spare room until I had left and everyone had gone to bed. He had been in the house the whole time I was there. The thought of it still creeps me out to this day. My sisters and I have years of stories from this one kid we babysat for over the years. First event happened when the kid, let's call him Liam, was maybe 6 or 7 years old. I was cooking for him in the basement. It was an old house, former estate from the late 1800s, so the kitchen was in the basement, designed for the servants. I heard some movement upstairs, like people had let themselves in, and were having a conversation and setting things down. Liam's parents weren't supposed to be back for another few hours, not a big deal. The voices didn't sound threatening, like women laughing and chatting, so I asked Liam if there's a maid or cleaning service that ever stops by, thinking the parents may have forgotten to mention it. He casually replies, "No, we hear voices sometimes, but Mommy and Daddy say not to talk about that." I checked, no one was upstairs and the front door was closed. There was also the time Liam went into a sudden trance while repeating some guy's name over and over after fixating on an old painting. He was rolling around on the floor for a minute with the whites of his eyes showing, then snapped out of it. He had no memory of it and was confused why I seemed so panicked and worried about him. I later told his parents, thinking it's an obvious health issue or was a possible seizure, but they just chuckled and said they would mention it to his therapist. That and the reoccurring night terrors that Liam would always have if he slept in one particular room freaked me out. It happened a couple times to him, once to his friend, but in both cases it was a sudden blood-curdling scream coming from the kid in the room. I remember racing upstairs to find his friend as she was hyperventilating upright in bed. She kept repeating, "There was a man in the room, there was a man in the room." Liam was also a sleepwalker. When he did sleepwalk, I would hear his blood-curdling scream, and he would sprint down the stairs to find me, seeming terrified but still definitely asleep and not aware of his surroundings, mumbling about a man. I was able to guide him back to bed without waking him while calming him down in his sleepwalking state. I felt guilty telling the kids it was just a bad dream or a nightmare when I believed they did see something, but I didn't know what else to say. So many stories over the course of 5 years between me and my sisters working with this family as their go-to babysitter. Then the usual lights and electronics turning on or off suddenly, objects falling off shelves inexplicably when no one was in a room, doors slamming shut and locking by themselves. My sister swears she saw a woman walk through the room out of the corner of her eye once before the TV turned on in the next room. Liam also had an early phase of frequently referencing the dead people. My friend who used to also babysit for them refused to even be in the house after the kids went to sleep because she hated it so much. She'd tell Liam she'd be on the front porch if he needed anything, then would sit outside and read a book until the parents returned. Even if it was freezing, she preferred it to being in the house as the only awake person at night. It didn't help that the house was a mile down a dirt road in the woods, past a swamp and old overgrown tennis courts, with coyotes howling in the distance. The property had no cell service, and house landlines were usually dead. The house was exclusively decorated with antiques and creepy sexual art and taxidermy critters. The parents were also pretty weird, and I'm sure they were into occult practices. There was a famous hippie New Age center in my town, which they were involved with. And there's even a documented story about rituals being performed on the edge of the estate. I learned about this history years after we stopped babysitting for them. Overall, it was a scary home to babysit in, but they paid well, especially when they'd come home drunk at 4 a.m. They'd just hand a wad of cash. Liam was a sweet kid when he wasn't saying creepy things, so it was worth it. As creepy as it was, the history of this estate is fascinating, and part of me wishes I stayed in touch with the parents just to see the house again. At the time, my sisters and I just assumed they were eccentric swingers going to late-night parties. In hindsight, I think they were doing something to encourage the activity over the years, and may have bought the house with the occult history in mind. For years, I had the occasional nightmare. My nightmares were of apparitions following me home from that house. It's now been a few years since I've had one.